From Tumblr, Hersima Sistani.
I'm super pumped to be here, and I want to start out by talking about something that I never get sick of talking about, which are my favorite TV shows. First, there's The Good Wife. I've been with this show from the beginning. It's now in season 6. It comes on CBS on Sunday nights, but I actually save it to savor it on Monday to start off my week. Speaking of Mondays, I'm also watching The Voice. I don't know if you've been watching, but Gwen and Pharrell are totally killing it. So I end up watching this one time shifted because first I watched The Good Wife. And also I recently discovered Veep. If you haven't, this is a gem. It's hilarious, and I'm watching it on VOD. And finally, there's House of Cards. Thanks to a complete lack of self-control, I binge watched this in a weekend, and now I'm waiting very impatiently for Netflix to drop the 3rd season. So you may be thinking that this sounds familiar or that something's missing, and that's live. I really can't remember the last time I watched live television, and I'm not alone. In fact, primetime ratings for broadcast networks were down 5% in August, and cable ratings were down 10%, with the greatest decline being among millennials. And spoiler alert, that happens to be something that Tumblr knows a little bit about. So what's happening here? Well, actually, we're watching more TV than we ever used to. 5 hours every day on average. So that means it's taking up more of our day than, I would guess it's right after sleeping and working. So what is changing are our TV consumption patterns. We're tuning to the internet, VOD, DVR, streaming services. Devices are helping to find more time in our day to consume this content. And the broadcast networks are hip to this. They are already starting to look at a live plus 7-day window when taking into account the performance of their primetime shows. TV is becoming more and more about timelessness and freedom of choice. In fact, this month, HBO and CBS both announced subscription-based over-the-top services. So why is it that the social marketing for TV is still trying to recreate a live second screen dynamic? It's like we're taking this old viewing habit of gathering around the tube and talking about television and applying it to an entirely new paradigm of content consumption. When in fact, what we really should be thinking of is how to engage those fans and create social ambassadors in a world that's always on. And the good news is that the digital water cooler is happening on Tumblr, and it's happening in real time, as well as on demand. And I'll share with you a little bit about what that looks like. So let's get some charts out of the way. I mean, Tumblr is, after all, about the GIFs. So Pulsar earlier this year looked at the broadcast window, but they also took a look at the social activity that was happening the 5 days before broadcast, as well as the 5 days after. And what they found was really interesting. Only 39% of the social chatter was happening in real time. And in fact, on Tumblr, the peak happens an hour after broadcast and is sustained for 3 days afterwards. So when you take into account a live plus 3-day window, the social TV activity is actually twice as big on Tumblr than it is on Twitter. Yes, people are talking in real time on Tumblr as well, but the sweet spot is that longevity of content that exists in the hours after broadcast, the days after broadcast. I mean, let's think about this. If you're really a super fan of a show and you're watching it, you want to stay connected to that program. So the type of chatter that you may participate in, it's short. It's, I'm watching Veep, #LOL, OMG. That's not the kind of content that really drives advocacy, and it certainly doesn't have a shelf life. Whereas on Tumblr, 61% of the conversation is happening between episodes, and this content has no expiration. And that's great. Whoops. Let's go back here. Because 85% of those viewers are coming to Tumblr between seasons to check out the shows that they love. They're extending the worlds of those shows. And we like to call those communities fandoms. So you may be a Scandal gladiator, or perhaps you're a Hannibal Fanable, or a member of the Colbert Nation. It doesn't matter. TV fandoms exist across all types of genres. And while we're at it, they actually exist outside of TV as well. Myself, for example, I love Beyonce. Who doesn't? I also am fanatical about SoulCycle, and I'm a Duke basketball fan. So that makes me a member of the Beehive, a Soul Survivor, as well as a Cameron Crazy. But I digress. So back to TV. 48% of users enjoy creating content inspired by TV shows. It's just not enough to talk about it. Instead, they're evangelizing, they're advocating, they're creating content in a way that's really meaningful for driving awareness. Some examples from Breaking Bad. And what's interesting about this content is that it lives in perpetuity. I could have been watching this show when it was live, or I could tune in right now to Tumblr to talk about this show. It doesn't matter. And that type of dynamic doesn't exist on any other platform. And these fandoms, they're loyal. AMC, for instance, recently announced the prequel to Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul. The show, it's not even on air, and it won't be for another 6 months, yet the fandom is already speculating, talking about it. They're excited. Can you think of any kind of better word of mouth than this? So I want to dig into the rich media that is the type of content being posted by these fandoms, starting out with narration content. And that's when users basically, I'm seeing now people are actually reading what it says here. Go ahead, get the laughs out. This narration content, it's when users basically take moments of a show, jokes, basically maybe details that they might have missed before, and they post it to Tumblr as a source to begin that conversation. So in this case, if you missed that recipe about buffalo testicles, you could catch it on Tumblr. My dad is watching the live stream. I just got embarrassed saying that out loud. So, at the end of the day, as content creators, this is an amazing opportunity because you have access to all of this content already. So be the first to post it. And in that way, you're really curating and owning that conversation. And in the case of HBO, what they do really well is they post that content, but while the show is on air, but they also post it off air. And that's great because fandoms, they don't turn off. They're 365 days a year. As this is some great content from NBC Parks and Rec. Ron Swanson. 20% of all original content are these kind of mashups. It's something that's totally new. And this is, again, amazing. And can you think of a better way to express your love for a show than an eggs and bacon version of Ron Swanson? Networks can really do well by embracing this derivative content. In the case of Netflix and Orange is the New Black, they reblog, and this helps really align them with the Tumblr fandom as well as amplify that community. At the end of the day, these creators are spending hours creating that content, all for the opportunity for a reblog. One of the other characteristics that's really unique about Tumblr fandoms is their ability to advocate for a show. In fact, 25% of all original posts are from Tumblr fans who are encouraging others to watch their show. We heard that earlier today when Andrew was presenting that the community fandom really helped bring that show back to life. This time not on a network, but on Yahoo. So here's where it gets important. And you may be thinking, well, I'm not a creator. How do I take part in this conversation? Well, 95% of all of the posts on Tumblr, they're reblogs. I'm going to let that sink in. So of the 90 million posts every day on Tumblr, 85.5 million of them are reblogs. That means shares. As a TV marketer, what better way to get in front of a new audience than to have your fans basically sharing content about the shows that they love? That means that 60% of the engagement that's happening on Tumblr is happening downstream from the follower count. Your followers, they're sold. You're preaching to the choir with them. On Tumblr, you have an opportunity to really get new eyeballs. I actually want to talk about that point a little bit further. So you may be thinking, but why would somebody share if they're not familiar with the show? Well, let's take that photo set from Veep that I shared earlier. That's funny, whether or not I'm familiar with the show. And the fact that I reblog it makes it even more likely that I will get curious about the show and tune in. Or the GIF of Frank Underwood rolling his eyes. I could recontextualize that to represent dismay, in a day that I'm having. And so, that dynamic, that's really unique to our platform. There were only so many times that I could stand Benedict Cumberbatch washing through my dashboard before I was finally like, okay, I'm gonna watch Sherlock now. So Tumblr, we understand that the internet doesn't exist on our dashboard. And in fact, we are the largest supplier of TV content to the social web. And what that means is really that all posts have a native syndication mechanism built in. And it's an opportunity to really infuse the social conversation across the internet. So maybe you were wondering how memes start on Tumblr. This is it. Hey girl, hey, binders of women, hot dog legs, that content started on Tumblr. So if there's only 3 things you take away from today, I hope it's that you don't have to be in a real-time environment to take part in a social TV conversation that's really engaged and passionate. And also that a 30-minute to 60-minute show actually becomes a week-long conversation on Tumblr. And finally, that fandoms are the best way to drive tune-in and awareness because they're posting some of the most meaningful content. At the end of the day, Tumblr really dominates the social TV conversation that matters. We're the bridge from episode to episode and season to season. And that's really important because in this day and age, there's a lot of damn good TV. Thanks.
Joining Seema is Dr. Michelle McCudden.
So thanks, Seema, so much. I think that is probably going to be our best use of memes and GIFs for today. I don't think anyone is going to have you beat. So we saw a lot of great content creation up there, people really creating a lot of stuff about the shows that they love. Where's that line for you between conversation and creation? And if most of the conversation is reblogs, is that still a conversation? Is that talking? Where do you see that line?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because at the end of the day, what they're doing is using that content as a reblog mechanism, but adding to the conversation in the commentary. Mm-hmm. So you could see that post about Veep, for instance, and somebody sharing it and saying, this is hilarious, I love this show, and then responding back, yes, but remember when X happened, or even posting back with another moment from the show. The content really helps drive the conversation.
Great. And so, thinking about that really high level of fan engagement, when you really love a show and you want to create and you want to talk about it, I know we've seen a lot of examples where, unfortunately, that hasn't translated to high ratings, right? We talked about Community earlier today, Arrested Development, my personal, thing that I cry about sometimes, that it's not on the air anymore. How do you kind of respond to that criticism, that people are talking a lot about the shows on Tumblr, but maybe not tuning in?
Yeah. Well, Arrested Development on Netflix now.
True story.
Right? I mean, I think that has to do, again, with the ratings. And, to go back to the presentation, you're seeing the network starting to recognize that and trying to communicate that to advertisers, because at the end of the day, Nielsen has become the currency for how media is bought and sold. And so I think that we have to get smarter about how we measure that audience. And starting with the live plus 7-day window is a really good way to look at it, because I don't think it matters if I tune in on day 3 versus the first day. In fact, ComScore just released a study and they showed that people aren't tuning in later because they're trying to forward commercials. They're just doing it because it's convenient.
Yeah, you can't watch The Voice and Good Wife at the same time, right?
I can't.
And so what about, I know I have shows that I love, and then they have shows that I love to hate, right? I like hate watch The Newsroom, for instance. So do you see a lot of that activity? Ooh, I think we both need to use that. I think we lost our mic. Hi. Do you see a lot of that activity, any like anti-fandom or people talking negatively about a show?
I love that you said hate watch Newsroom. I love that show. Aaron Sorkin's brilliant. Yeah, so the thing about Tumblr that I think is interesting is that the way that it was designed is to really inspire a positive social sentiment. And that's really unique in a platform that allows for anonymity. So what I mean by that is when you reblog something, which you have to do in order to comment on it, you're basically putting that statement back onto your own, into your own environment. So the likelihood that somebody's going to be negative is really low. So you post something about the Newsroom, and I hate that show. I reblog it to say I hate it is very unlikely. And so that's kind of a nice, design mechanism that's kept the conversation positive, which is really great for, the TV conversation, but for brands as well.
Thanks. So, speaking about brands, we have, a lot of people here today who have brands that aren't a TV show. But I know that, for me, a lot of that same behavior around a TV show, you love it, you want to talk about it so much, you maybe want to create some things talking about how much you love it, could also apply to other brands. We see brands that sort of inspire that same amount of passion. Think about brands like Apple, the Apple fanboy example. Do you see that same kind of behavior? The examples today are mostly TV-based, but do you see that kind of behavior with other brands too?
Oh, I definitely do. I think that brands are producing some of the best content on Tumblr. In fact, they're using it as a mechanism for, inspiring that conversation. The example that comes to mind is Starbucks, and they have Frappuccino.com, which is a Tumblr, or PSL.com, which is a Tumblr dedicated to the pumpkin spice latte. And people are sharing that content like crazy, and they're talking, they're also sharing their own coffee picks and latte designs. And I think that again, as I was mentioning before, the fandoms, they don't exist just across TV, and that activity is true across all the various verticals.
Great, so let's take a question from Twitter real quick. So what about copyright? Have you seen any issues with copyright infringement or brands getting mad about the use of their images?
I can't personally say that I have. What I would say is that we are seeing more and more networks really embrace that derivative content because they see that it is, fandom based and it's largely positive. So, I would say to date, that hasn't been too much of a problem, and I hope that that continues to remain so.
Great. And I think that is it for our Twitter questions. Is there anything that we haven't covered or that, you feel like you want to talk about? Another TV show that you love?
Oh my gosh, I could go on forever. Seriously, I could go on forever. I didn't mention The Daily Show. I love Jon Stewart.
Okay, we have one more. How can advertisers capitalize on the between episode conversation that's happening on Tumblr? You called out Girls as being someone who's doing that really well.
Well, I think that it's all about, and this isn't my forte, but I would say that they have an ability to basically target that audience on Tumblr. Certainly, if you're looking to reach, the type of audience, for instance, who is watching The Voice or Girls, certainly there's the opportunity to amplify your content to that audience. The other thing that I would say, and that's something that most people don't realize, is that your web-facing Tumblr is O&O. So the networks actually own it, and if they wanted to monetize it, they could, and that would be totally their prerogative.
That's really interesting. Thank you so much, Seema. This has been great.